Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Mirabelle Johnson woke up to the sound of her alarm and the early morning call of hawkers in the streets below her penthouse. The gentle hum of cars out on the main road melded seamlessly with the chirping of birds perched on the power lines. The city of Lusona, one of the fastest-growing urban centers in modern Africa, was already wide awake, and so was Mirabelle's busy mind. As she lifted her head from the plush feather pillow and pushed away her silk duvet, she couldn't help thinking about how her life had taken such an unexpected turn. She was, after all, the young, dynamic CEO of a thriving tech company. She had been recognized on the cover of Africa Innovate magazine for her cutting-edge software solutions, and she had delivered talks at major conferences across the continent. Mirabelle Johnson, at just 29, had built what people described as a tech empire. But none of that seemed to matter at the moment. The previous night's family drama still pulsed in her head like a dull headache. She had spent hours on the phone with her best friend, Dorothy Chambers, recounting every excruciating detail. It all began a few months ago, after her father's untimely passing. Mr. Paul Johnson had been Mirabelle's rock, an industrial magnate who, from a young age, encouraged her to dream big, to pursue technology, and to dedicate herself to innovation. The two of them often joked about how they would disrupt the status quo in their home country, bringing advanced tech solutions to underprivileged communities. Sadly, Paul Johnson's heart attack left many dreams unfulfilled. The real blow, however, came when Mirabelle discovered that a significant chunk of her father's estate was still tied up in complicated legal agreements. Her stepmother, Karen Johnson, had been married to her father for only 2 years. Yet Karen claimed to have an equal stake in the family's fortunes, particularly in the shareholding of Mirabelle's technology firm. The cunning in Karen's demeanor was no secret. She was known for her expensive taste in fashion, her penchant for exotic vacations, and her overwhelming need to be in control. But no one in Mirabelle's circle had anticipated that she would use every trick in the book to manipulate the outcome of her late husband's will. It was at a hastily arranged family meeting that Karen dropped a metaphorical bomb. The only way Mirabelle could retain her rightful inheritance without facing a protracted legal battle would be if she married someone from a humble background, chosen by the family. The reason, Karen claimed, was that Mirabelle's father had always wanted her to understand the struggles of the common man and remain compassionate, never letting wealth turn her into an indifferent figure. To Karen's twisted mind, ironically, that meant forcing Mirabelle into a marriage that would allegedly remind her to stay grounded. Mirabelle had tried to object. She pleaded, argued, and threatened to hire her own legal team. She even tried to talk to her father's old friends, seeking their help to make sense of the situation. Unfortunately, either Karen had already gotten to them, or they didn't want to be involved in a messy family affair. When her mother died many years ago, Mirabelle's father had promised to protect her. Now, with her father gone, she felt alone in a sea of sharks. At the center of this turmoil was a man named Daniel Parker, the quiet, unassuming street cobbler who ran his small shoe repair stand near one of the busiest intersections in the city. Mirabelle had only passed by his stall once, many years ago, while out with her father. They had been buying some roasted maize from a roadside vendor when Mr. Johnson praised Daniel's work ethic and resilience. Daniel had looked like any ordinary man from the streets. A torn apron, a small hammer in hand, piles of worn-out leather shoes stacked around him. But Mirabelle had also noticed a certain quiet dignity in his eyes and a sharp intelligence flickering behind them. That day, her father had given Daniel a generous tip for repairing a pair of shoes, and Daniel had bowed in gratitude. She never imagined that years later, she would be coerced into marrying him. Karen's logic was twisted but cunningly sold to the rest of the family. Marrying a street cobbler will ensure that Mirabelle doesn't lose touch with her father's philanthropic vision. Mirabelle's aunts, uncles, and half-siblings, most of them benefiting directly from Karen's manipulative strategies, nodded in agreement. They believed Karen's version of the story that Paul Johnson, if alive, would have wanted Mirabelle to tie the knot with someone who would keep her grounded. Distraught and feeling cornered, Mirabelle retreated to her penthouse, burying herself in the pile of documents that shaped her life: legal papers regarding her father's will, share certificates of her tech company, personal diaries filled with dreams and business strategies, and a photo album of her father hugging her at her graduation. Everywhere she looked, she saw her father's legacy, and she feared losing control of everything she had worked for. That night, she received a call from Karen. The wedding date had been set for a month away. "Make sure you are prepared," Karen's frigid tone echoed through the phone line. "I don't want to see any of your fancy suits or your modern attitude there. This will be a traditional African wedding ceremony, mixed with Christian rites, of course. And yes, Daniel Parker has agreed to it. I trust you won't back out." A wave of numbness washed over Mirabelle after that conversation. She had no idea what to expect from Daniel. Had he been coerced too? Was he being paid off? Or was there some deeper plot behind his acceptance? Despite her defiance, Mirabelle felt oddly curious. Was Daniel truly as poor and uneducated as Karen claimed? Or was there more to him than met the eye? She shook her head and forced herself up from the bed, the sun's rays now filling her bright bedroom. Moving toward the large windows, she gazed out at the sprawling city. From the vantage point of her penthouse, she saw a blend of towering skyscrapers and bustling outdoor markets. The spirit of enterprise and survival thrived below, reminding her of the thousands, if not millions, of people, just like Daniel Parker, who earned their daily bread under the scorching African sun. Mirabelle made herself a cup of strong black coffee, determined to start her day with as much normalcy as possible. She had a board meeting that morning at Johnson Innovation Solutions, the tech firm she had built from the ground up. As the CEO and lead software architect, she was developing robust, secure applications that streamlined microlending across the continent. Her current project aimed to help underbanked communities, enabling them to access small loans via mobile apps. It was a passion project that lined up perfectly with her father's philanthropic dreams. She slipped into a sleek navy blue suit, clipped on her name tag, emblazoned with the letters "Phew" beneath her name, and grabbed the tablet from her desk. Before she left, she paused for a moment, inhaling deeply. She whispered a silent prayer, hoping that the day might bring answers or at least some measure of clarity. Yet a seed of dread had already taken root in her heart. As she navigated the luxurious halls of her high-rise apartment building and stepped into her chauffeur-driven car, she couldn't stop wondering. How could she, Mirabelle Johnson, the poster child of modern African technology, end up in an arranged marriage with a poor street cobbler? And what, if anything, could possibly come from such a mismatched union? Mirabelle spent most of the drive to her office lost in thought. The city's vibrant scenes whisked by her window, throngs of people huddled around breakfast stalls selling akra, fried bean cakes, suya stands grilling spicy meats for passers-by, and roadside vendors balancing trays of fresh fruit on their heads. The morning hustle was typical of Lusona, people going about their daily lives with resolute determination. In any other circumstance, Mirabelle would have drawn inspiration from this hustle, perhaps remembering how she and her father would walk these very streets to understand customers' needs when developing new software solutions. But now, an anxiety gnawed at her soul, overshadowing her usual sense of pride and excitement for the city. Her driver, a middle-aged man named Andrew, adjusted the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of Mirabelle's knitted brows. He had known Mirabelle since she was in high school and was practically family. He cleared his throat. "Madam, is everything all right?" he asked gently. Mirabelle managed a small smile, knowing she couldn't confide all her troubles in him, especially not about her forced wedding to a man she barely knew. "I'm fine, Andrew. Just a lot on my mind." "Thank you for asking," she replied, her voice betraying her unrest. Andrew nodded politely, returning his eyes to the road. At the Johnson Innovation Solutions headquarters, Mirabelle was greeted by her efficient secretary, Gabriel, who presented her with the day's itinerary. "You have a board meeting in 15 minutes, Ms. Johnson," he said, handing her a digital tablet listing bullet points. He hesitated for a second, noticing her distant expression. "Should I get you anything? Tea, coffee, or maybe a glass of water?" She shook her head with a tight smile. I'll be fine, Gabriel. I appreciate it. Stepping into her sleek executive office, a space lined with glass walls, abstract art, and the faint hum of air conditioning, Mirabelle placed her belongings on the large mahogany desk. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's skyline stretched out, a testament to the dynamic progress of Lusona. It was a fitting view for a tech CEO, reminding her daily of the city she helped drive into the modern digital era. The board meeting commenced in the large conference room. Members of the board, some local investors and a few from overseas, discussed the progress of their newest financial app. Data analytics, pilot runs in smaller communities, and user interface upgrades were all on the agenda. Mirabelle tried to maintain her usual commanding composure, but her thoughts drifted every time she saw Karen Johnson's name blink on her phone's caller ID. She ignored the calls, determined not to let family drama seep into her professional life, at least not during a critical meeting. When the conference concluded, Mirabelle thanked everyone for their input and adjourned the session. As she stepped out, her phone buzzed again. It was a text message from Karen, short but loaded. We must finalize wedding plans. Contact me ASAP. Mirabelle tossed her phone into her handbag, exhaling slowly. She felt the walls closing in. She decided to take a walk around the building, a tactic she often used to clear her head. The wide corridors of Johnson Innovation Solutions were lined with motivational quotes and collaborative zones where software developers brainstormed. She took the elevator down to the ground floor, where a small coffee shop offered staff and visitors a quick break from the hectic schedules. She bought herself another strong coffee, her second for the day, and found a corner to sit, hoping to calm her racing thoughts. That was when Dorothy Chambers, her longtime friend and the chief financial officer at the company, approached. Dorothy had caramel brown braided hair and wore a sharp gray suit. She exuded confidence and compassion in equal measure. Spotting Mirabelle's sullen look, Dorothy sat down beside her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Belle, I know we spoke at length last night, she said softly, but I'm worried about you. You look exhausted. Any progress with the situation at home? Mirabelle took a moment to stare into her steaming cup. No, she replied wearily. Karen wants me to confirm final details for a wedding I don't even want. I haven't even told you the biggest bombshell. I'm supposed to marry the street cobbler, Daniel Parker. Do you remember him? Dorothy's eyes widened. She recalled the time when Mr. Johnson had praised Daniel's craftsmanship. Wait, Daniel Parker? From the shoe stand near Greenmarket? This is insane, Belle. Why would Karen choose him of all people? Mirabelle shrugged. She claims it aligns with my father's wish to stay connected to humble beginnings. But I don't believe her. I suspect she has some hidden motive. Perhaps she's trying to sabotage me, or maybe she's using Daniel as a pawn. Dorothy nodded, her expression grim. We can dig into Daniel's background. Maybe hire an investigator? If we find something unscrupulous or questionable, we might stop the wedding on legal or moral grounds. Mirabelle sipped her coffee thoughtfully. That's an option. But for now, I might just meet him. See how he reacts to all this. I need to know if he's complicit or just another victim. That afternoon, Dorothy rearranged Mirabelle's schedule so that she could step away from the office earlier than usual. Mirabelle instructed Andrew to drive her to the bustling avenue where Daniel Parker ran his cobbler stand. She recalled the general direction, but the streets had changed. Tall new buildings, neon signs, and a flurry of startups had sprung up. Still, the old essence remained: street vendors, busy traffic, motorcycles weaving through narrow alleys, and the ever-present hustle that made Lusona a vibrant African metropolis. When the car halted, Mirabelle stepped out in her tailored corporate attire, drawing curious looks from passers-by. It wasn't common to see a high-profile CEO standing near a cluster of small-time roadside businesses. She took a moment to compose herself, smoothing down her suit jacket, and walked toward Daniel's stall. There he was, Daniel Parker in his threadbare apron. His shoulders hunched over a wooden stool as he carefully hammered nails into a battered shoe. His hands were calloused, the nails short and rough. A small sign propped next to him read, "Quick Shoe Repairs, Daniel Parker." A couple of customers waited patiently, engaged in hushed conversation. Despite the noise of the busy street, Daniel worked with meticulous focus. Mirabelle waited until he finished with one customer. Then she cleared her throat. "Daniel Parker?" He looked up, and the moment he recognized her, a flicker of surprise, maybe even fear, crossed his face. He stood quickly, nearly knocking over a small container of tools. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice low. "I didn't expect to see you here." She glanced around. "Well, I needed to talk to you about the arrangement. The wedding." The final word came out shakily. Daniel nodded. His expression turned stoic, though 1,000 emotions seemed to swirl in his eyes. "I see. Let me finish attending to these customers, then we can talk." Mirabelle stood aside, folding her arms over her chest. She could hardly believe she was standing on a busy roadside in her expensive heels, waiting for a man she was supposed to marry, yet barely knew. As Daniel wrapped up the repairs, she observed him closely, his steady hands, his calm demeanor, and the way he offered a polite smile to each customer. There was a certain dignity in his posture, reminiscent of something she couldn't yet place. When Daniel finally turned to her, he wiped his hands on a rag and gestured toward a nearby bench under the shade of a large umbrella. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, the hum of city life surrounding them. Horns blared, hawkers chanted, and the aroma of roasted plantain from a nearby stall wafted through the air. "I'm sure this is as strange for you as it is for me," Mirabelle began carefully. "I've been told we're to be married in a month." Daniel nodded again. "Yes, Mrs. Johnson," Karen reached out. "She told me about your father's last wishes. She offered me some financial support for my mother's medical bills if I agreed." He paused, taking a breath. "I couldn't refuse. My mother is very ill and Mirabelle felt a pang of empathy. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces began to connect in her mind. Daniel might be just as trapped as she was. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know about your mother. Karen never mentioned that part." Daniel looked down at his hands. "We're in dire straits, Ms. Johnson. My mother's all I have, and the medical bills have been piling up for months. Karen saw my desperation and insisted I do this. In return, she promised to settle the bills and set up a small savings account for me." A strange mix of outrage and pity welled up in Mirabelle's chest. She realized the depths to which Karen would sink, preying on a man's desperation. But even so, she didn't fully understand why Karen wanted this wedding in the first place. What did Karen stand to gain by forcing Mirabelle to marry someone who seemingly had no hidden advantage? Unless there was more to Daniel Parker than met the eye. In the days that followed their first face-to-face meeting, Mirabelle found her world turned upside down. Her stepmother, Karen, had begun bombarding her with wedding plans, the color schemes for the ceremony, the guest list, and even the type of attire that would be worn. Karen insisted on a blend of modern African and Western styles, which was not unusual in Lusona, where couples often celebrated with both traditional African fabrics and formal European wedding gowns. But everything about this felt wrong to Mirabelle. She should have been excitedly planning her special day with a man she loved, not dreading a forced union to rescue her inheritance and Daniel's dying mother. Despite her distaste for the arrangement, Mirabelle realized she needed to keep her cool. A full-blown confrontation with Karen could jeopardize not only her financial stability but also Daniel's chance to pay for his mother's treatment. So, Mirabelle forced a smile during family dinners, feigned interest in fabric choices, and listened politely when Karen insisted on a huge wedding that would be the talk of the town. It was obviously a power move on Karen's part, a spectacle meant to underscore her control over Mirabelle's life. Meanwhile, Daniel was pulled into the swirling chaos of wedding preparations. Karen paraded him around as though he were an exotic curiosity, showing him off to Mirabelle's aunts and uncles, who eyed him with varying degrees of disdain or bemusement. Some members of the family whispered that Daniel was in it for the money, while others pondered whether he might be sincere. Most of them had known Mirabelle since childhood and were well aware of her achievements, so they found it bizarre that she was set to marry a man whose entire world consisted of a rickety shoe stand. Mirabelle and Daniel, feeling increasingly stifled by the orchestrated wedding plans, sought brief respites where they could speak privately. Daniel would slip away from family gatherings to find Mirabelle, or she would shoot him a text message, summoning him to her office after hours. Their late-night conversations in the quiet corners of the building offered a rare sense of calm. One evening, Mirabelle sat opposite Daniel in a small lounge adjacent to her office. The area was designed for employees to unwind, with low couches and potted plants. The overhead lights cast a warm glow around them. She handed him a bottle of fruit juice and then settled in, crossing her legs. "How's your mother doing?" she asked gently. Mirabelle had been worrying about the older woman's health ever since Daniel had confided in her. Daniel sighed, taking a sip from the juice. "I managed to take her to a better hospital downtown. They're running some tests." Karen wired a deposit directly to the hospital to cover initial costs. Mirabelle's lips formed a thin line. On one hand, Karen's action helped Daniel's mother. On the other, it only tightened Karen's hold on Daniel. "I'm relieved she's getting the care she needs," Mirabelle said finally, "but I hate that Karen is using both of us like pawns." "She's not the first person in my life to exploit my desperation," Daniel replied, his voice edged with bitterness. "But I'll do what I must for my mother. I'm grateful to you for understanding my situation. You haven't treated me like some gold digger." Mirabelle offered a faint smile. "I know what it's like to feel cornered." She fiddled with her phone, searching for a distraction. "Dorothy, my CFO, wants me to investigate any hidden angles. But so far, I only see one angle. Karen is controlling everything." Daniel nodded, then reached into his pocket to retrieve a small slip of paper. "This is the hospital receipt. See, the deposit Karen sent is more than enough to cover immediate costs. It's almost too generous. It makes me suspicious. Why this amount?" Mirabelle examined the receipt, noticing the hefty sum. Indeed, Karen had paid an amount that could sustain hospital bills for a year if needed. "Have you tried asking her about it?" Daniel laughed without mirth. "She just said, 'Don't worry about it. I'm taking care of my soon-to-be son-in-law's needs.'" It felt more like a threat than a gift. Their conversation was cut short when a security guard knocked on the door to inform Mirabelle that Karen was waiting at reception. Rolling her eyes, Mirabelle muttered, "She must have tracked you here somehow. Let's go." At reception, Karen stood in a regal stance, wearing a form-fitting African print dress, her hair styled into an elaborate updo. She reminded Mirabelle of a lioness guarding her territory, except the territory in question was Mirabelle's life. Karen's eyes flickered with impatience as she saw Daniel and Mirabelle approach. "I was expecting you two to be at the tailor's for measurements," Karen said sharply, tapping her foot against the marble floor. "We have appointments for wedding attire. Must I run your schedules for you?" Mirabelle swallowed her retort and mustered a polite tone. "I'm sorry, Karen. We got caught up discussing some logistics. We'll head there now." Karen offered a tight smile. "Good. I've already paid for premium fabrics, imported from Europe. The ceremony will be grand, and all eyes will be on the Johnson family. I won't tolerate tardiness or half-heartedness." Mirabelle and Daniel exchanged fleeting glances before following Karen outside to the sleek SUV waiting at the curb. The ride to the tailor's shop was tense, with Karen dominating the conversation, giving instructions about the color palette, royal blue and gold, and the formal Western-style dresses for the church segment of the wedding. Yet, at the same time, she insisted that the men's attire incorporate traditional African embroidery, reflecting our cultural heritage, as she put it. At the tailor's, Mirabelle found herself being poked and prodded by measuring tapes. The soft hum of the sewing machines provided background noise while Karen hovered, nitpicking about the designs. "She needs a more fitting bodice," Karen declared at one point, making Mirabelle grit her teeth. For Daniel, the tailor measured his shoulders, waist, and inseam. He looked visibly uncomfortable as Karen exclaimed, "We must ensure the groom doesn't look too plain next to my stepdaughter." After the fittings, Karen left them in the tailor's waiting area to finalize the color choices. Mirabelle took a seat beside Daniel, shooting him an apologetic look. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this spectacle," she whispered. He offered a half-smile. "It's not your fault. We're in this together." For a moment, they both looked at each other, trapped, frustrated, but also oddly united in this shared predicament. Mirabelle found herself wondering about Daniel's life story. How had he become a cobbler in this sprawling city? Was he always so reserved and polite, or did he hide deeper scars from a world that had let him down time and time again? Later that night, once she was back in her penthouse, Mirabelle collapsed onto her bed. The day's stress weighed on her. She gazed at the city lights twinkling outside her bedroom window, reflecting on her bizarre situation. A forced wedding to a man she barely knew, orchestrated by a stepmother whose motives were still unclear. The wedding was less than 2 weeks away. She could almost hear the countdown ticking in her head. Despite her exhaustion, Mirabelle's mind was restless. She felt a newfound empathy for Daniel, and a protective instinct stirred within her. If she couldn't escape this wedding, perhaps she could at least uncover why Karen was so determined to force them together. And maybe, just maybe, there was a hidden path that would allow both her and Daniel to retain their dignity and help Daniel's mother, without falling victim to Karen's schemes. The wedding day loomed closer, bringing a palpable tension to every corner of the Johnson household. The final week leading up to the event was a whirlwind of rehearsals, fittings, and endless family meetings. Karen supervised it all with an iron fist. She orchestrated everything, from the bouquets of fresh hibiscus flowers to the mouth-watering African and Western fusion menu that would be served. Mirabelle's evenings became a kaleidoscope of conflicting emotions. One moment, she would be deep in conversation with Dorothy, discussing strategies to protect her assets in case Karen tried to pull another stunt. The next, she was forced to attend family functions where Karen paraded the wedding plans to an audience of extended relatives, neighbors, and business associates. It all felt surreal. Every so often, Mirabelle would break away to meet Daniel in quiet corners of the Johnson mansion, away from prying eyes. They were awkward allies, their bond cemented by the shared burden of a wedding neither had wholeheartedly chosen. During these encounters, Daniel spoke little of himself, preferring to remain tight-lipped about his personal life. He assured her that his mother's health was stable for now, thanks to the funds Karen had provided. Mirabelle sensed there was more to him, but she couldn't place her finger on it. The day before the wedding arrived in a rush of adrenaline and dread. Mirabelle was at home, being primped and styled for the following day's traditional rites. The sprawling Johnson mansion bustled with guests who had arrived early, mostly from out of town. Designer-clad women gossiped in the corridors. Men in tailored suits discussed business and politics over glasses of champagne. Traditional drummers practiced out in the courtyard. Everywhere Mirabelle turned, she heard some variation of, "You're such a lucky bride," or, "This wedding will be the talk of Lusona." Little did they know the bride felt like a prisoner, awaiting a trial she never signed up for. That evening, Mirabelle found Daniel in the mansion's back garden, standing near a fountain. The soft glow of lanterns revealed his pensive expression. As she walked toward him, she noticed he was gripping an old, worn-out notebook in his hand. "Couldn't stand being inside any longer?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel offered a tight smile. "All those curious stares. I needed some fresh air." Mirabelle nodded, looking up at the star-studded African sky. "Tomorrow is the big day. Hard to believe." He glanced at her, struggling to find the right words. "I have something I need to tell you, Mirabelle," he began softly. "I thought about waiting until after the wedding, but it's important, you know. This arrangement, there's more to it than Karen's manipulations." Mirabelle felt her heart skip a beat. "What do you mean?" He opened the old notebook, flipping through some pages filled with tidy handwriting and sketches. "You see these designs?" he asked, pointing to a series of drawn shoe prototypes. "I haven't always been just a simple cobbler. I studied engineering abroad for a while, but circumstances forced me to drop out and return home. I had big dreams, ideas for innovative footwear that could help reduce foot strain and injuries for Africa's working-class laborers. But life took a different turn when my father passed, leaving my mother and me destitute. I had to hustle, so I opened that roadside stand. But I never gave up on my dream." Mirabelle scanned the designs with growing fascination. They were intricate, clearly the work of someone with both technical skill and creative flair. "Daniel, these are incredible," she murmured, running her fingers over the lines of a concept shoe designed with advanced cushioning technology. He gave a sad smile. I once pitched a version of this idea to an investor who promised to help me secure a patent and funding for a startup. That investor turned out to be a con artist. I lost almost everything. My savings, my laptop, vital research files. She learned about my design somehow. She said if I agreed to marry you, she'd help me resurrect my dreams and also pay for my mother's care. I couldn't refuse. Mirabelle felt anger flare inside her, but also an odd sense of relief. At least the puzzle was becoming clearer. So Karen's not just manipulating me, she's manipulating you for something. But why does she need you to be tied to me for her to back your project? Why not invest in your idea directly? Daniel shrugged. That's the part one don't understand. She hinted that you were the key, maybe because you control a significant portion of your father's estate, or maybe she just wants to use your tech company's resources. I'm not entirely sure. Silence stretched between them, filled by the distant sounds of laughter and music drifting from inside the mansion. Mirabelle finally spoke. We should stand together on this. Tomorrow, the wedding might happen. But we can't let Karen keep us in the dark. We need to watch her closely. Daniel gave a determined nod. Agreed. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. Sunlight streamed through Mirabelle's windows, casting a golden glow on the elaborate fabrics and ornaments scattered around her room. She was up early, pacing in her satin robe, anxiety churning in her stomach. In a few hours, she would be walking down the aisle, one that had been decorated with a mix of royal blue draperies and gold ribbons, just as Karen had demanded. A team of makeup artists and hairstylists arrived to transform Mirabelle into the picture-perfect bride. Outside, the Johnson mansion was a flurry of activity. Caterers unloading trays of food, florists adjusting final touches, and ushers directing arriving guests to their seats. Mirabelle sat in front of the mirror, her reflection framed by bright vanity lights. She thought about her father. A tear slipped down her cheek as she wondered how he would react if he were here. Would he approve of this spectacle? Would he recognize the manipulative tactics of his second wife? More importantly, would he understand the desperation that had led Mirabelle to go along with it? When she was finally dressed, the stylist fastened a delicate gold necklace around her neck, and she donned a flowing gown that blended Western white lace with African wax prints at the sleeves and hem. She looked every bit the radiant bride, though a storm of emotions brewed just beneath that polished exterior. Downstairs, Daniel waited in a neatly tailored suit accentuated by subtle African embroidery. He stood with his shoulders back, trying to appear calm despite the quickened beat of his heart. At a glance, he looked like a poised groom, but his mind buzzed with uncertainty about the hours ahead. When the processional music began, traditional African drums accompanied by a string quartet, Mirabelle made her entrance. Every head turned, and a collective gasp filled the space at her regal beauty. Cameras flashed, and guests murmured compliments. As she locked eyes with Daniel, a silent understanding passed between them. They would endure this wedding, but they would not be Karen's pawns forever. The officiating pastor stood at the front, looking grand in his robes. Flanking him were two cultural leaders, honoring both the Western and African traditions. Karen sat in the front row, wearing a smug expression, sipping in the spectacle. She reveled in the attention, perfectly aware that all eyes were on the Johnson family today. As the ceremony progressed, Mirabelle could hear the quiet hush of guests. The tension was almost tangible, the air thick with a mixture of awe, gossip, and curiosity. Vows were exchanged, and rings slipped onto trembling fingers. On the surface, it appeared to be a typical grand wedding. A beautiful bride, a devoted groom, a proud family. Only a few close to Mirabelle and Daniel knew how the two were truly feeling. Then came the final rites. The pastor pronounced them husband and wife, sealing the union with a triumphant, "You may now kiss the bride." Applause erupted, cameras clicked, and confetti rained down on them. Mirabelle leaned in for a chaste kiss, her mind reeling with the reality of what had just happened. She was now Mrs. Mirabelle Parker, at least in the eyes of the law and society. If only the day would end there. But as they walked back up the aisle together, arms linked, Daniel's demeanor shifted. His expression hardened, and his hand trembled slightly against Mirabelle's elbow. She glanced at him questioningly, but he offered only a brief nod. Something was brewing in Daniel Parker's mind, and Mirabelle had no idea that a revelation was about to drop, a secret that would shake not only Karen but the entire gathering to their core. The moment the ceremony concluded, the reception flowed seamlessly into the mansion's grand banquet hall. Sparkling crystal chandeliers, long buffet tables laden with sumptuous meals, and towering floral centerpieces greeted the newlyweds and their guests. A live band played a fusion of highlife and Afrojazz, setting a lively tone that had people tapping their feet to the rhythm. Karen basked in her triumph, greeting guests with an almost theatrical graciousness. She introduced business partners and family friends to Mirabelle and Daniel, each time announcing with pride, "Here's my daughter, the bride, and her wonderful husband." As though it had been her dream all along to see Mirabelle happily wed. The duplicity made Mirabelle's stomach churn. Despite the forced smiles, Mirabelle and Daniel managed to slip away momentarily to find a quiet corner near the serving area. Daniel's agitation was noticeable, his breaths came quickly, and sweat beaded at his temples. "I can't stand this any longer," he muttered under his breath, fiddling with his collar. "What's wrong?" Mirabelle asked, her concern evident. She noticed he kept glancing toward the elevated stage where the master of ceremonies was preparing to give a speech, with Karen seated regally off to one side. Daniel swallowed, eyes flicking between Mirabelle and the stage. "Remember I said I had something important to reveal? Something that goes beyond Karen's involvement." Mirabelle nodded cautiously. "Yes. What is it?" Daniel looked around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "I told you about my designs and how Karen offered to fund them if I went along with this marriage. But I recently discovered she doesn't plan on investing in them legitimately. She means to claim my work as part of the Johnson estate, under your name, more specifically, and then corner the market in footwear technology." Mirabelle's eyes widened. "That's preposterous. How could she get away with that?" He shook his head. "She's already lined up a partnership with an overseas manufacturing firm. Once everything is set, she'll claim you commissioned my work, pay me peanuts, and then own all the patents. My name might not even appear on the final product, unless as a token courtesy." He paused, face clouding. "But that's not the only secret. The bigger issue is something about her finances. I found documents in her study, bank statements, offshore accounts. It looks like she's funneling money from your father's estate and trying to launder it through shell companies." Mirabelle's jaw dropped. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I stumbled upon the files while in her office. She was printing something and I offered to fetch it, but found more than I bargained for. This wedding is a smokescreen. She needs your official cooperation as part of the family so she can shift even more of the estate assets before anyone suspects. The moment the wedding is recognized legally, she can redirect control of certain assets under her name, claiming it's all for family expansion. But it will end up in her private accounts." Mirabelle felt a wave of rage. She always suspected Karen's greed, but this was on another level. If Karen was siphoning family funds on top of everything else, it spelled disaster, not only for Mirabelle's inheritance but also for the philanthropic and tech projects dear to her father's heart. She pressed a trembling hand to her forehead, trying to steady herself. "We need to expose her," she whispered. "But how?" Just then, the MC called for the guests' attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the groom's speech. Can we have Mr. Daniel Parker come to the stage, please?" A hush fell over the crowd. Mirabelle's heart pounded as Daniel straightened his posture. He took a steadying breath. "I'm going to do it now," he said, voice tense. Mirabelle grabbed his arm. "Daniel, wait. Are you sure? We need to do this carefully. She's powerful. We need proof." He patted the inside pocket of his jacket. "I have copies of her documents right here. If I expose her in front of everyone, there'll be too much public pressure for her to hide it or hush it up. Even if she tries to deny it, people will demand an investigation. And your father's business partners, who are here, might step in to protect the company's reputation." Mirabelle's mind whirled. This was risky. Karen could retaliate in countless ways. But given the scenario, Letting her get away with it wasn't an option. She nodded, stepping aside as Daniel made his way to the stage. Her heart thudded so loudly she could barely hear the applause welcoming him to the microphone. Daniel cleared his throat. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice echoing through the speakers. "Thank you for being here on this special day. I'd like to start by expressing my gratitude to the Johnson family for accepting me into their fold, and to my mother, who is unfortunately too ill to attend." Polite claps followed, some guests wearing confused expressions. Daniel continued, "I want to acknowledge my wife, Mirabelle. She's an incredible entrepreneur, a leader in African technology, and, despite the unusual circumstances, a kind soul. But I also have a responsibility to tell the truth. And so, I must reveal a secret that weighs heavily on my heart." There was a ripple of murmurs across the hall. Karen, seated near the front, narrowed her eyes. Mirabelle caught sight of her stepmother's face, taut with suspicion. Daniel's voice grew stronger, fueled by righteous anger. "Some of you know me as a simple cobbler from the streets. And that's true. I run a humble shoe repair stall. But what you may not know is that I once studied abroad in engineering, and I developed a series of innovative footwear designs aimed at helping millions of workers across Africa. I intended to patent these designs and launch a startup. However, certain circumstances, and yes, manipulations, led me to sign an agreement that exploited my situation and compromised my rights to these designs." A collective gasp began, though the biggest shock had yet to come. Daniel reached inside his jacket pocket and drew out several folded sheets of paper. "I have evidence here of an elaborate scheme. Funds from the Johnson estate, which Mirabelle's father wanted used for charitable, educational, and tech initiatives, are being siphoned into private offshore accounts. The person orchestrating this is none other than Mrs. Karen Johnson." A jolt of stunned silence rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed, capturing the tension of the moment. Karen half rose from her seat, her face contorted in fury. "This is absurd," she shouted. "You dare accuse me, on this day, at my own daughter's wedding?" But Daniel pressed on, ignoring the chaos. "I'm sorry if this offends anyone," he said, "but I can't remain silent. This marriage was forced upon me and Mirabelle for reasons that go far beyond genuine affection. My mother's hospital bills were paid as leverage against me. Mirabelle's inheritance was threatened as leverage against her. And all to disguise a massive financial deception." Karen's eyes blazed with outrage. She stormed to the stage, pointing an accusing finger at Daniel. "You liar! You're just a street rat I was trying to help. How dare you slander me?" Her voice cracked, betraying her panic. Guests around the hall erupted in a cacophony of whispers and shouts. People stood to get a better view, some pulled out phones to record. In the midst of this chaos, Mirabelle stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. She took the microphone from Daniel. "If these accusations are false, Karen, then you have nothing to worry about. We'll simply hand these documents over to an independent auditor. I'm sure you, as my stepmother, would welcome an investigation to clear your name." Karen turned a deep shade of red. She looked around desperately, searching for an ally among the shocked relatives and business associates. But no one offered her a lifeline. Even those who had once indulged her extravagances now retreated, unwilling to be associated with potential criminal activity. Mirabelle held her breath, waiting for Karen's reaction. She knew that by publicly revealing the scheme, they had cornered Karen. But how she would respond, fight, flee, or manipulate further, was anyone's guess. A stunned hush gripped the banquet hall. Karen stood rooted at the center of the stage, eyes darting from Mirabelle to Daniel to the incriminating documents in Daniel's hand. The once celebratory atmosphere hung heavy, tinged with disbelief. A robed elder from the extended Johnson family, Uncle Richard Johnson, rose slowly, leaning on his cane. He cleared his throat, voice quivering with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "Karen, is it true that you have been siphoning funds from the Johnson estate?" His gaze flicked to Mirabelle. "My brother Paul would never have allowed such a thing." Karen's chin trembled, and her once confident posture sagged. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, she snapped, So what if I transferred a little? Paul always left me with less than I deserved. I married him, I put up with his aloofness and traveling. I wanted a portion of the wealth he promised to share with me, but then he left it all to her. She thrust a trembling finger toward Mirabelle. I only wanted my fair share. None of you understand how difficult it was to be married to that man. A cacophony of gasps and disapproving murmurs filled the room. Uncle Richard shook his head in disgust. That's no excuse for fraud, he declared. Paul loved you, or he wouldn't have married you. But to twist his will, to blackmail these two young people into a loveless wedding? That's despicable. Karen wheeled on Daniel, her eyes aflame. You think you can outsmart me, boy? You're nothing. A pauper with delusions of grandeur. She turned to Mirabelle, sneering. You were never a proper daughter to your father, always gallivanting with your big city ideas, your technology. If he saw how you're humiliating me today, he'd roll in his grave. Mirabelle felt her anger spike. She gripped the microphone. You're the only one humiliating yourself, Karen. You used my father's memory, my inheritance, Daniel's desperation, and for what? Greed. She looked out at the crowd, her voice resounding with newfound authority. I won't let her tarnish my father's legacy. I'll cooperate fully with any legal investigations. This wedding was forced upon Daniel and me as part of her scheme. Shocked faces filled the room. Family members, business tycoons, and local dignitaries had all witnessed the drama unfolding in real time. Some had recorded the confrontation on their phones, and it was clear that Karen's attempt at a rebuttal could not erase the raw evidence. Daniel gestured for one of the event photographers to come forward, handing over the copies of the documents. Please ensure these are scanned and sent to Mirabelle's legal team right away, he said. Karen realized she was cornered. Her mouth opened and closed wordlessly. A few security personnel, stationed near the hall's entrance to maintain crowd control, now looked to Mirabelle for guidance. Sensing the meltdown approaching, they stepped onto the stage, carefully placing themselves between Karen and the newlyweds. The band, which had stopped playing amid the chaos, struck a few nervous chords. The master of ceremonies stood uncertainly to the side, microphone in hand, not sure how to proceed. A hush settled again, waiting for the next move. With a great sigh, Mirabelle handed the microphone back to the MC. I apologize to all our guests for this public confrontation, she said gravely. We didn't plan for this to happen on what was supposed to be a joyful day. But these matters needed to be brought to light. The crowd murmured in a wave of agreement. Dorothy stepped out from among the guests, approached the stage, and wrapped a reassuring arm around Mirabelle's shoulders. We'll handle the legal steps, she whispered. You're doing the right thing. Meanwhile, Daniel stood beside Mirabelle, steadfast despite the emotional toll. He glanced at the audience, searching for a friendly face, and found none that offered him condemnation. Instead, he saw sympathy, curiosity, and perhaps even respect. After all, it took courage to stand up against a powerful figure like Karen Johnson, especially on a day that was meant to celebrate him as a groom. Karen's expression slipped from fury to fear as she realized the full magnitude of what had happened. The truth was out, publicly, and any attempt to salvage her reputation seemed futile. She glanced around for allies, but none stepped forward. Even her closest confidants avoided her gaze. The press of cameras, the buzz of guest chatter, and the knowledge that this scandal would reverberate far beyond the wedding hall bore down on her. She hurried off the stage, eyes darting wildly. For a few long minutes, the wedding guests remained frozen, trying to process the shock. Then, the MC cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the event. Ahem, well, ladies and gentlemen, we realize this is highly unusual. However, we do still have a reception to continue. He cast a sympathetic glance at Mirabelle and Daniel. Perhaps the bride and groom would like a moment to catch their breath? Dorothy spoke up on Mirabelle's behalf. Let's take a brief intermission so we can sort out immediate issues. Refreshments will continue to be served outside on the lawn. We'll make an announcement shortly. Gradually, the crowd dispersed into smaller clusters of murmuring onlookers. Mirabelle and Daniel, relieved yet emotionally drained, stepped off the stage. Dorothy led them to a private room, a small study lined with bookshelves. There, Uncle Richard and a couple of older family members joined them. Uncle Richard sank into an armchair, letting out a weary sigh. This is all too much. Paul would have been devastated to see this day turn out like this. He fixed Mirabelle with a serious look. You did the right thing, child. Exposing wrongdoing is never easy, especially from within one's own family. Mirabelle nodded, exhaustion evident in her eyes. I couldn't let it continue, she whispered. My father's legacy means too much. And Daniel's been a victim just as I have. One of the older aunts, Clara Johnson, patted Mirabelle's hand. You've always been a strong girl, Belle. You'll get through this. Then she glanced at Daniel, offering a cautious yet warm smile. And you, young man, you showed courage. Don't let this overshadow your good intentions. Daniel gave a small bow of acknowledgement. Thank you. My only hope is that my mother receives the care she needs, and that Mirabelle's rightful inheritance, her company, her father's estate, remains intact for the good she intends to do. A swirl of questions and emotions whirled around the room. There was a newly married couple, joined under false pretenses, yet bound by a shared moral stance and unexpected unity. There was a shattered stepmother who had fled the scene, likely to face legal repercussions in the coming days. And there were extended family members grappling with the realization that the woman they had accepted into the Johnson family was a fraud. After a private meeting with the family elders and Dorothy, Mirabelle and Daniel stepped outside, where the wedding guests milled around. Some approached to offer congratulations on their truthfulness. Others apologized for not suspecting Karen's duplicity sooner. A few business associates, who had once been allied with Karen, quietly asked Mirabelle how they could maintain a positive relationship with Johnson Innovation Solutions. In the late afternoon sun, the African sky glowed a brilliant orange, and a gentle breeze rustled the tall palm trees lining the mansion's driveway. Mirabelle and Daniel walked together, side by side, down the ornate steps leading to the front lawn. The band had resumed playing softly, more out of a sense of duty than celebration. Waiters still bustled about, refilling glasses and offering hors d'oeuvres, though the wedding had lost its original pomp and splendor. Finally, Daniel turned to Mirabelle, his voice a soft rumble over the fading music. I'm sorry about all this. I never wanted to ruin your wedding day or cause you public humiliation. Mirabelle pressed her lips together before exhaling. Perhaps it's better that it happened this way. The truth is out, and we're free from Karen's manipulations. As for the marriage, we'll figure out where we stand. We can annul it if that's what we both want, once the dust settles. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate your understanding. But please know, I respect you, Mirabelle. Working together, maybe not as husband and wife, but as partners in some form, could be beneficial. For both of us. She offered a gentle smile. We share a passion for innovation, Daniel. And a dedication to helping people, like your mother, and the underprivileged communities my father cared about. Maybe we can build something good out of this mess. At that moment, Dorothy and Uncle Richard approached. Dorothy had her phone in hand, reading messages as they appeared. She grinned. Karen's accounts are frozen. The legal team moved swiftly after Daniel's big reveal. She won't be able to move a single cent of the estate's funds. Uncle Richard clasped Daniel's shoulder, then Mirabelle's. The family stands behind you both, he said solemnly. If there's anything we can do to rectify this fiasco, let me know. Mirabelle and Daniel exchanged a look filled with relief. The day had been tumultuous, one that began with forced vows but ended in a collective stand for the truth. There would be lawyers, investigations, and plenty of public scrutiny in the coming weeks. Yet in that small circle, beneath the setting African sun, there was a sense of hope. The forced marriage, the manipulations, and the shocking revelations had brought Mirabelle Johnson and Daniel Parker together in a way no one could have predicted. They stood quietly for a moment, letting the tension of the day melt away. The final notes of a mellow jazz number played softly in the background. In those fleeting seconds, neither Mirabelle nor Daniel could be sure of what the future held, only that they had taken a stand for what was right. And sometimes, in the unpredictable tapestry of life, that is enough to light the way forward. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.